to welcome you to this public symposium on the Obama Presidential Center at the University of Chicago. My name's Tom Mitchell, and I'm the principal organizer of this symposium, along with a lot of help from my friends and a lot of co-sponsors. First, I want to thank the hundreds or so University of Chicago professors who signed a letter back in January raising a number of questions about the proposed Obama Presidential Center here on the south side of Chicago, questions which will be discussed in an open forum here tonight. Second, I should mention the financial supporters of this initiative, the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation, one of our newest research institutes at the university, the Chicago Center for Contemporary Theory, the Mellon Sawyer Seminar on Urban Art and Urban Form, a group of professors and students who have been exploring the whole range of topics surrounding public art and public places, along with many other issues in urban life. I should also mention the scholarly journal Critical Inquiry, which I edit along with 8 colleagues in several disciplines, and which publishes a wide range of articles on culture, politics, and the arts. And finally, I want to thank my students in my PhD seminar, Space, Place, and Landscape. We've been meeting all winter, and they have been following their crazy professor on field trips all over the South Side, learning how to look at vacant lots, urban gardens, boarded up houses, architectural landmarks, and magnificent historic public parks. They are serving as ushers and ticket takers tonight, and this symposium is the capstone event of our seminar. A seminar which has taken us basically all over the world in the students' work, from Jerusalem to the Mexican border, from a glass mountain on the Yellow River in China to the famous pagoda of Hangzhou, from Love Plaza in Philadelphia to the Currency Exchange Cafe on Garfield Boulevard, to Little Baghdad in the suburbs of San Diego, to walls, borders everywhere, from the Black Belt to the terrible wall which is projected on the Mexican border. At every turn, however, our attention has returned to this place, the one we inhabit on the south side of Chicago, the cluster of neighborhoods which, in my rather narrow perspective as a provincial U of C professor, I see as the neighborhoods that surround Hyde Park. That is Bronzeville, Woodlawn, South Shore, Washington Park, Jackson Park, Highlands, Grand Crossing, and many others. The list of place names seems endless, and the distinctions among these places. This is a moment of intense historic transformation for the South Side, producing an acute sense and widely shared sense of the symbolic and practical potential in the decision of the first black president of the United States to bring his library to the south side of Chicago. The historic legacy of the Obama presidency as a beacon of visionary possibility tempered by a firm moral compass and what can only be called sweet reasonableness in the Oval Office has never seemed more important to me than at this moment in the dark nightmare of his successor's presidency, clearly now the worst in American history, and I think we can all agree on that, however much we might disagree on anything else. I'm sure, though, that when President Obama brought his library, his presidential center, to the South Side, he was well aware that his former colleagues and neighbors are an argumentative bunch, always prepared to look a gift horse in the mouth and to count every one of its teeth. In a nice bit of irony, the most famous community organizer in Chicago's history has returned home to find that a lot of folks in that community are getting organized to raise questions about his plans and to push back with suggestions about what they like and don't like. Nothing surprising about that. In fact, it's what I love about this neighborhood and this community. It is the spirit of old-fashioned public involvement and citizenship that was the key to the magic of the Obama presidency all along. So to me, I hope no one will go away from this evening thinking this is some kind of gathering to obstruct or negate Obama's presidency or his presence on the South Side. I believe everyone here agrees the presidential center should be here. But when you get to the details, there are arguments, and this is going to be a moment to hear many sides of these many questions. The one thing that has been surprising to some people in this process is the way the Obama Foundation has responded to our invitation to participate in this event. And I should mention, we invited the City of Chicago, the Mayor's Office, the Park District, and indeed my own university to send representatives. I should clarify, this is not a University of Chicago sponsored symposium. This is a bunch of community members and some university professors and organizations doing this at the university. But I'm afraid that the leadership of the Obama Foundation has declined the opportunity to be here tonight. And I think this reflects one of the problems that many people have felt with the Foundation's communication with the neighborhood. I've attended numerous community meetings over the last year, and I began to notice a pattern. The meetings were more like marketing exercises and sometimes pep rallies, featuring glossy PowerPoint presentations, but relatively few opportunities for open public discussion. Instead, we were given breakout groups, which fragment the public, and questionnaires that reduce the public to statistical interest groups. Are you a bird watcher or a tennis player? On the rare occasions when an open discussion has been allowed, questions were too often deferred or evaded. We were told the plans were still in flux and that all suggestions were being listened to, taken into account. At the same time, it seemed that many decisions had been made and were not subject to review. A professional golf course scheme was unveiled, piggybacked onto the presidential library, which then suddenly stopped being a library and became a presidential center with a gymnasium and other facilities. We were told that 5 acres of the Midway had to be appropriated for the center's parking lot, an absolute necessity that turned out to be negotiable when some complaints were raised by affluent neighbors who just happened to live right next to the Midway. A community benefits agreement to put in writing the many glowing promises and protect low-income residents from eviction and higher rents was declared out of bounds, with the promise that the Obama Foundation would do even better than such an agreement. And above all, the location in Jackson Park, an appropriation of 20 acres of public land, was declared a done deal that could not be revisited, even though large areas of vacant private land close to public transportation were and still are available. As I attended the Obama Foundation meetings, getting to know dozens of my neighbors for the first time, I heard many of them expressing misgivings about the one-sided nature of these community meetings and the growing feeling that the old-fashioned Chicago backroom deals were being rolled out. This is reflected in the fact that not only did the Obama Foundation refuse our invitation, so did the Park District, the City of Chicago, and I'm sorry to say, the university itself, whose secret winning bid to put the OPC in Jackson Park has never been made public to this day. So this symposium is a kind of act of compensation. Nothing but a chance for the sort of many-sided public discussion that has, in my experience, not been encouraged sufficiently at the Obama Foundation's meetings. I hope it will be, as Naomi Davis has urged, an occasion for education and inspiration. We've convened a panel of local and national experts who will weigh in briefly with their thoughts about the many issues surrounding the proposed presidential center. Our moderator, Barbara Ransby, will then orchestrate a conversation among the panelists. After that, we have a few more experts in the audience. In fact, I think there's a lot of experts in this audience looking around, who represent a variety of organizations that have been tracing the history of this wonderful event on Chicago's South Side in great detail. Then we will open the floor to discussion for all the experts who are here. Our aim, I want to repeat, is not to block or frustrate the Obama Foundation, but to help it get it right. All we are trying to say, to echo the old peace song, is let's get it right together. I want to acknowledge the presence here of CAN TV, which is celebrating their 35th anniversary, and I want to give them a shout out for providing the tools Chicagoans need to create programming and make their voices heard. So tonight I want to rename them the Yes We Can TV. And now I'm going to turn over the floor to my colleague, history professor at University of Illinois Chicago, Barbara Ransby, who will be our moderator for the evening. Barbara needs no introduction to this audience, so I'm not going to give her one.
Thank you. So thank you, Tom, for pulling this together and being the tenured rabble-rouser that you are. And it's great to see such a full house tonight. I'm happy to be here. I'm not here in my capacity as a historian, but someone who lives in the neighborhood across the street from the site, actually. And I'm going to try to manage and facilitate this conversation, which hopefully will be a lively conversation, because I'm looking in the audience and there are many people, as Tom said, as distinguished as our panel. So the panel is a fierce and distinguished one. And I also want to say, as a preface, you know, the question I think in our discussion and the comments that you're going to hear is how, what, where, and for whom in terms of this project. So we have various types of expertise on the panel, but also I'm very happy to say community organizers who have been fighting the good fight on the South Side long before Barack Obama was president, or that there was discussion of a presidential center on the South Side. So we have the benefit of that wisdom in the room, and I would be remiss not to acknowledge the sort of dean of social justice on the South Side and in the city of Chicago, our beloved Dr. Temuel Black, who is sitting in the front row. So I'm going to introduce the panel. People are going to speak about 7 minutes or so, very briefly. And then the format is we're going to have a few people from organizations will offer brief responses, and then it'll be your turn to engage in Q&A. And I'm going to ask you to be very disciplined and succinct in your comments, because there's a lot of people in the room and we want to have some back and forth. So we're not going to have long speeches, and you all look lovely, but I will cut you off. So just to warn, give you a heads up. And I'm still nice, so I will nicely cut you off. Okay, we're going to begin with Charles Birnbaum, who is the president, CEO, and founder of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, with nearly 25 years of experience working on historic and landscape preservation and urban design. He's also currently a visiting professor at Columbia University. He'll be followed by Naomi Davis, to my far right. That's not to locate you there politically at all, quite the contrary. Naomi Davis is an urban theorist, attorney, activist, and founder and CEO of Blacks in Green, BIG, a national sustainability network and community development corporation. She serves on numerous boards of environmental organizations, including the Great Lakes Advisory Board, Illinois Natural Resources Advisory Board, and Illinois Clean Jobs. And also, on the website for this program, you can see much longer bios of our panelists. Then we'll hear from Jawanza Malone, who is the executive director of COCO, the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. COCO is one of the oldest membership-based grassroots community organizations in Chicago, dedicated to serving low-income and working families. Jawanza helped to successfully negotiate a community benefits agreement as a part of Chicago's bid for the 2016 Olympic Summer Games, and is active in the coalition demanding a CBA from the Obama Presidential Library, and we hope you will be as successful in that regard. And then finally, Michael Sorkin, because of the weather on the East Coast, was not able to join us this evening. He is the principal of the Michael Sorkin Studio, a global design practice specializing in green architecture, and he's also a professor at the City College of New York, and Tom Mitchell is actually going to read Michael Sorkin's remarks in his absence. So that's the plan for this evening, and we'll start with Charles.
Great, it's wonderful to be here. Tom just said to us, in terms of his students, learning how to look. And that's really what I want to talk about this evening is, how do we perceive landscape when we move through it? And what are the questions we should be asking ourselves when we think about how we measure success in the public realm? Tom, I want to thank you for all of the juggling that you've done to pull this off. It's kind of miraculous when I see how many balls you have in the air, and I want to say how honored I am to be with such a distinguished group. I also thought I would put our mission statement up here as part of my statement of being honored to be here. Our mission, quite simply, is connecting people to places. Now, you might consider me an outsider to Chicago. It's a place I have visited for many years. I have a deep romance with this city. I started coming here when I had a full head of spiky hair, and I kid you not, I was wearing red Converse high tops. And in 1986, after Walter Netsch and Margaret Burroughs and Jesse Madison were here, and Ed Euler had found that cache of drawings that had been forgotten, unlocked, I came here as a New Yorker, urban designer, had never been to the parks before. I ventured out into the parks. I took public transportation and then counted on the generosity of friends to get me to places like Sherman Park. As I went through the parks, every car window that was open, I heard Janet Jackson playing. And so to this day, this is my symphony when I move through the Chicago parks. Now, I also want to tell you that the 6 photos that I'm going to show you now are photographs that I took on that visit in 1986. And for those of you that are too young, and I feel really freaked out being old enough, because I'm thinking, I'm 24, how could I have been here in 86? But think about this. This was the artistry of what landscape architects had created in one of the great cities of the world. And this is what a Prairie River looked like. This is what a council ring looked like. I know that Promontory Point was just listed on the National Register. This is what Alfred Caldwell and Jens Jensen's work looked like. This is what a promenade, a boulevard, looked like. This is what a sidewalk looked like in Washington Park. Hard to believe. This was a place to fish. This was a place to sit. Ouch. We forget. Now I'm going to show you some other photos that I've taken in more recent years, coming back to the great parks designed by Olmsted and Box and Jensen and Caldwell and others that are unrivaled anywhere else in the United States of America. This is what a lagoon looks like. This is what a council ring looks like in the Austin community today. A Prairie River in Douglas Park, a place to fish, a place to have spiritual contact with nature, a place to have continuity of use and expression and cultural lifeways that grow out of the landscape. So, what do all of these places have in common with Angela Bassett? Let's talk about great bone structure. Okay. Now, because I have to be respectful of time and I have a good charge, I'm going to now rely on my script. But, you know, it's interesting. People say, when did you get involved in this? And a lot of folks don't know that we've been involved in the parks here for many years. I founded the Cultural Landscape Foundation as a volunteer 20 years ago because I had been in the government and I was tired of top-down. This is where we live. We have to understand these places. And so for a number of years, the Cultural Landscape Foundation has been actively involved in engaging in a conversation on the South Parks. We've been involved because the University of Chicago's bid called for the confiscation of parkland at either Jackson Park or Washington Park, land held for 150 years in public trust. This is nationally significant and historic parkland. Jackson and Washington Parks, along with the Midway, were designed by Olmsted Sr., the father of landscape architecture, the creator of New York Central and Prospect Parks. And the involvement of Olmsted and his sons with the Chicago parks lasted for decades. All three parks are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and for the folks in the community that are interested in nature and ecology, one could probably argue that this might have been the first brownfield site in America, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, people say, why didn't you raise these questions earlier? Well, on February 12, 2015, the Huffington Post published our letter that we sent to the President and Mrs. Obama, in which we said, please don't approve the taking of parkland for the Obama Presidential Library. There was no response to our letter or the Huffington Post posting. What is now called the Obama Presidential Center, a private facility to be built on public land and not a presidential library administered by the National Archives, as approved by the city on January 21, 2015, may well provide significant economic benefits to Chicago's South Side. I sincerely hope that all of the promises that were made to residents by the University of Chicago and the Obama Foundation during their carefully controlled community presentations come to pass. We shall see. I'm sure my fellow panelists have more to say about that. However, the University of Chicago, Mayor Emanuel, the Chicago Park Board, the Obama Foundation, and others have set a bad and frankly dangerous precedent by taking parkland held in public trust for the center. The promise of revitalization and economic benefit need not come at the expense of parkland. It's not an either-or situation. Chicago's South Side can have both. For example, there's a vacant city-owned land across the street from Washington Park and adjacent to public transportation that could be used for the center. Citing the OPC across the street from Washington Park could effectively extend the boundaries of the park. In addition, the University of Chicago owns land that could be used for the center. It's worth remembering that the three other universities that vied to host the OPC proposed to site it on land owned by each of those universities. The University of Chicago was the only one that demanded parkland for the purpose. This is an all-reward, no-risk situation for the university. They have no skin in the game, but now they can develop and make money off of the land they own, rather than using some of it for the OPC. And we do know that they've spent millions of dollars in the past few years buying more land on the South Side. We have yet to find out what benefits the community will get, but it's reasonable to assume the university is set to make a bundle. The taking of parkland is a bad precedent for Chicago because it opens up other city parks for similar development. Moreover, it's a bad precedent for the nation because privatizing parkland for the OPC gives a green light to every municipality in the country to confiscate parkland for other private enterprises. Where does it end? This symposium this evening is important because despite all of the tightly controlled public meetings, one of the greatest problems surrounding this process is a lack of transparency. In a conference call among the panelists a couple of weeks ago, Naomi Davis said that not enough community education was happening. Instead, we have a virtual cult of secrecy. Here are some of the things we need to know. 1, first, we've never seen the University of Chicago's bid for the OPC. What's in it? And we need to know about the university's land holdings on the South Side. Right now, that information is about as available as President Trump's tax returns. 2, we need to know how security hardening will affect the park. The OPC promises greater connectivity between the neighborhood and the park. Is that possible given security concerns? 3, could the $175 million slated for OPC-related road construction instead be used to acquire a suitable plot of land on the South Side for the OPC? 4, we need to know how and when the OPC will be reviewed for compliance with the Urban Parks and Recreation Recovery Program, which provided money for planting more than 1,000 trees, shrubs, and ornamentals in Jackson Park. And then finally, we need to know how and when the OPC will be reviewed through the lens of Section 4F. I know I'm a Washington guy, and this must all sound like gobbledygook, but these are critical review processes. The Department of Transportation Act, which prohibits the Federal Transit Administration and other U.S. DOT agencies from using land in publicly owned parks, recreation areas, wildlife and waterfowl refuges, or public and private historic properties unless there is a feasible and prudent alternative to use it. It makes no sense to plan for the project first and postpone addressing these legal requirements, which could be deal breakers. The rule is do it right or do it twice. Let me close by saying that I've spent my entire career working with public parkland. First in private practice in New York City, working on iconic home design landscapes like Prospect Park. Then 15 years with the federal government at the National Park Service, developing guidelines for the nation's cultural landscapes, and for the past 20 years as the founder and CEO of the Cultural Landscape Foundation. I can say that not since the city's bid for the 2016 Olympics, that would have plopped a stadium into Washington Park, have I ever seen such an egregious misuse of parkland or such irresponsibility on the part of the city officials and agencies entrusted with its care. We can do better. Residents on the South Side should not be forced to sacrifice parkland to attract the OPC. There are other options, as President Obama told us just last week when he said, "There is so much room. Think about all the abandoned buildings and vacant lots around here." In closing, let's go for a win-win. Let's keep the OPC on the South Side, and let's keep valuable parkland also. Thank you.
Greetings, cousins. How y'all doing? All right, then. So my focus tonight is enterprise. What works and what doesn't work to foster enterprise that will build community wealth. I'll touch on place and heritage, secrecy and manipulation, economic impact, written documentation, and parity and process in planning. And so the name I've given my talk tonight is obviously Out of the Woodworks and Into the Light. And, but I want to start with a little context first. There is no media and no man, there's no media and no man who can define or reduce me to a simple idea. I'm as complex and as important as race in America and will not be explained away. I am an environmentalist, educator, entrepreneur, attorney, activist, artist. I come from the most privileged generation of African American children in history. I come from white gloves and mud of my grandmother's life, a Mississippi sharecropper, as fearlessly believing a woman as any ever born. You see my prop there about believing. Second, we love our president and first lady unequivocally. We waited in the open air in 2008, some of us for hours, some of us with our dearly departed parents, wrapping around the corner, inching our way up to the polling booth. For some of us, it was one of the most important nights in our life. And with unconditional pride, we voted for our African American president, emphasis on African. And he is our president forever, no matter how we parse our points. Are we clear? Okay. Third, call it what you like, but we're gonna measure what matters. We're gonna do business. We're gonna build community wealth. Any black neighborhood that needs a winning lottery ticket to survive is a doomed one. So Blacks in Green, let's see. Blacks in Green celebrates the city of villages where every household can walk to work, walk to shop, walk to learn, and walk to play. So building the sustainable square mile, living the 8 principles of green village building. And this kind of walkable village is what we have dedicated our resources, our time and mind to. Many of us grew up in an age when such places were even predominant, and we understand what makes them work. We are the authors and teachers of the 8 Principles of Green Village Building. We are the authors and teachers of the Sustainable Square Mile. And we are looking tonight at how the context of development happens in the places where we live. And we're not going to let anybody turn us around. Fourth, if we come out of the woodworks, we come out hungry, looking to eat. Whenever a good idea comes percolating up, it should go to the top and to the front. The best ideas should be implemented. We've been bamboozled about jobs so many times, and still we rise, or at least we hang in there, and we have survived. We're now talking about how do we create a critical mass, a regional look at enterprise on the South Lakefront. We're looking at what some call an innovation metropolis. And so we're here tonight to do the math, and we're here to let our compadres know of all stripes that we're looking at a regional approach. We're looking at a way to build enterprise so that in a place like Woodlawn, we can be as rich in businesses, neighbor-owned businesses, local businesses, as some of our Midwestern neighbors are. And we come by it honest. This is my mother, Juliet Siggers Davers, who had all kinds of hustles on the side in addition to her full-time job. And food enterprise was one of them. And we understand that equity must underlie all that we do, that who decides, who gets paid, parity analysis, leveling the playing field, prioritizing the disenfranchised, that these are the things that we must do. We know that we've got a whole system problem common to Black communities everywhere. And when the Bronzeville Regional Collective, of which I'm a co-founder, understood the Obama Presidential Center was coming in 2014, we penned a letter to the Obama Foundation. And the purpose of the letter was to get together in relationship and get out in front of potential problems that we understood historically around the country could happen. So we understood that the trajectory of the last 100 years wasn't so fabulous, and we were looking at how we could get our hands on the next 100 years, where that 40 acres and a mule didn't happen, where the Mississippi Delta, where cotton was the emperor, didn't produce wealth for the people who lived there, who were of color, who took to the trains and took to the donkeys and came to the north, and who settled in places like my home, St. Albans, Queens, and became the presidents of everything. Here, my mom, the president of the Flower Club. And guess what? We come by it honest. The Green Goddess rocks in West Woodlawn where we work, and we believe that using the history and the heritage of the places, including Parkway Gardens, where she famously lived for a few years as a child, can be transformed into solar and agriculture and all kinds of enterprise if we focus on what we need to do to put the infrastructure in place. Because I'll tell you what, we know we got a heritage. And you know what? Everybody doesn't love the building that's coming. I rather do. And in any case, what we know is that our family has come home to us, and we're grateful to have them here. But we got to get it in writing. We understand that in the early days, when Superintendent Mike Kelly wrote to Mayor Emanuel to let him know that they had to somehow put together a plan for how it would look for the community to be a demand for the golf course, that was orchestrated. Look, let's just be straight. Can we just have some straight conversations? Can we understand what the University of Chicago owns, what they're doing, what their standards are? Can we understand that that the numbers that are jettied about for economic development deserve to be unpacked? I'm extracting numbers, they're out of context, but even in context, and you can read them, those of us who want to understand and who deserve to understand cannot understand on our own. The Deloitte economic impact study, the Anderson impact study, we've never seen them. And yet we know that the development is coming. Do we understand what kind of community benefits are going to redound to anyone other than the investors of the University of Chicago? So here we get to the short and curlies of it, where we're just kind of trying to unpack things, where we're trying to get people in a room and have some real, genuinely methodical, deep-diving conversation. This was the Sustainability and Transportation session that the Bronzeville Regional Collective produced last August. And this is, you know, some of our messaging to our friends, stakeholders, shareholders in the neighborhood. So we just want to do the math, because we understand you can't manage what you can't measure. And check it out. This is what I measured, blacks and green, a stunning, shocking volume of land transfers between 2013 and 2016. Original research. Okay, this is what looks like it's okay, you're not going to be displaced, don't worry about it. And that first picture that we opened on is what lack of absorption looks like. Real estate professionals will tell you that it's okay because the absorption rate is really slow, but when you live right across the street from a building, like I live across the street from that one, it's very, very no and low solace. So we know that our taxes are an issue. We want to get down to the meat of what it costs for a household to operate and what investment will look like by neighbors so that we can create a whole new age of neighbor investors and developers. So this is what Kurt Summers recently shared with us, our city treasurer, about the extreme racial wealth disparity of blacks in Chicago, okay? And all we want to make sure we're drilling down on is, look, if we're gonna take tax dollars, whatever amount it is, we should first of all know, but if we add them all up, do we know what color the supply chain is? Do we know that there's equity in those contracts? Are we aware that the process has a return on investment analysis? Do we get to vote? These are all reasonable questions. We want to look at those supply chains. We want to be able to say, yes, this is fair, it's balanced, it's equitable in the ways that we define equity. Remember, who makes the decisions, who gets paid, and what standards are we requiring for those who are coming to our neighborhood to make money? So is there parity in the process? You know, the North Shore has been in planning for 4 years now, and counting, for how they're going to redefine their lakefront. I ain't mad at them, but I don't want to be rushed when it's time to consider mine. Because we understand the rape and rescue cycle has its own, you know, sort of momentum. We're not going for that. We understand spatial deconcentration, we understand it has happened to us, but we're not up for another cycle of it. And therefore, here we head into the light. We head into the opportunity to create enterprise. Here's one about green infrastructure, where many of the hundreds of lots that look like this can become like this, can become like this, and can take the saga of the 100 years of the Great Migration comers and create the opportunity to own, develop, and manage the property in our promised land with standards that are curated by the community. Yes, we want the financing. We want to be able to design, direct, represent, and benefit. We want there to be measures. We want there to be an increase in household income. We want there to be measuring, tracking, reporting, and adjusting of the economic targets. We want neighbor income to circulate, and we want the conservation lifestyle to become standard. Because guess what? Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So, my name is Juwanza Malone, Executive Director with the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, proud member of the Obama Library Southside CBA Coalition. I think the speakers before me did a phenomenal job putting things into context. I'm going to do what I can to add a couple of points. And so, as someone who at one point in time wanted to be a journalist, I'm going to try to use the who, what, when, where, and why to add a few points. So, as everyone before me has already said, the concerns that have been raised and will continue to be raised in relationship to this presidential center is not opposition to the presidential center, is not opposition to the former president, is not opposition to development, right? What we have is a situation where the Obama Presidential Center can very well be a Trojan horse that's going to drive displacement and gentrification in this part of town. And so what I want to do is just share a couple of thoughts to explain why I say that. So first off, I think I messed up. There it is. What is the CBA? So a CBA is a legally binding agreement between developer and the community. Oftentimes the government is brought in to back up whatever the agreement is. CBAs of varying levels and strength and scale have been developed across the country with for-profit as well as nonprofit developers. One of the first large-scale CBAs, people might know this already, but was in relationship to the Staples Center in LA back in 2001. Less than a decade after that, Columbia University engaged in a community benefits agreement. And I want to just read a quick snippet from the website where Columbia talks about the CBA. While much of the CBA relates to financial or physical resources, the university responded to a community desire to not simply focus on cash benefits, but to develop a more substantial relationship between the community and the academic resources of the university. Which brings us to why a CBA for this project. Now, the foundation has said CBA is not the right tool for this development. Of course, I disagree. The coalition I'm a part of disagrees, and a ton of people in the neighborhood disagree. So why do we feel this is the right tool? Chicago has a very special strain of racism that's been cultivated for generations now and has placed low-income and working African-American families in particular in a virtual caste system that is maintained through the coordinated efforts of elected officials and moneyed interests. Despite the best intentions of the former president, without legislative protections for the families who call this community home, they will be pushed out. Last year, Woodlawn, the community where this presidential center is going to be built, had the third highest increase in property value in the entire country. So let's think about that. Take every neighborhood in every city, in every state in this country, and Woodlawn, a community that's been ignored for generations, came in number 3. Now, what changed last year from all the previous years is why we're here talking today. And so that announcement drove real estate speculation through the roof. Ground hasn't even been broken yet. But all eyes are now on Woodlawn. And so when asked about this, the mayor of the city, Rahm Emanuel, I'll wait for the boos and hisses. Thank you. Said that it was a sign of good things to come. So the question that immediately came to mind for me was, good things to come for who? The median household income for Woodlawn is $25,775. Nearly 80% of the population is comprised of renters. This means that as property values increase, property taxes are going to increase, rents are going to increase. And so some of the most vulnerable people in our city are going to be forced to leave Woodlawn in search of more affordable housing. So who would sign a CBA? Dr. Ransby talked about my work with the Chicago's bid for the Olympic Summer Games, where we were able to craft a community benefits agreement attached to that. And that was passed as city ordinance. This shouldn't be any different. Our elected officials, while we know sometimes it doesn't exactly work that way, have been elected to represent us, the residents of this city. And so we would negotiate what that ordinance would look like. We did the heavy lifting. For a 2-year period, no less than 1,000 people were brought into rooms in a very ground-up process and asked, what is it you need to feel protected in your home? What is it you want to see going forward to ensure there's real benefit that comes back to you and your family? And they gave it to us. And we compiled it, summarized it into a document that we refer to as our CBA. And we've gone to the University of Chicago, we've gone to the City of Chicago, and we've gone to the Obama Foundation to negotiate what the final product looks like. Understanding that we've gone half the way, we want to go the rest of the way together in partnership. But that is not what they want to do. So where's the opposition? I think Naomi did a phenomenal job talking about the role of the university in recent times in relationship to the black community here on the south side of Chicago, the history of land banking. So back during that time, Alderman Pat Dow, 3rd Ward Alderman, called out the University of Chicago for land banking. Now, this land banking was taking place at the same time. Now, what was going on? Anybody in the audience knows? The city was negotiating the bid for the Olympic Summer Games. So you have the University of Chicago land banking while the city is negotiating a bid. Now, you have all this talk about collusion between Trump and Russia, right? To me, that sounds like collusion between the city and the university. And we see the same thing happening in relation to this. Why is the university's bid secret? They can't claim proprietary interest. They've already run the bid, right? So why haven't they released it? The city of Chicago gifted $95 million worth of public property to the foundation for what in return? And so when we look at the history of the University of Chicago, when we look at the history of the city of Chicago in this part of town, something begins to bubble up to the surface. And it's not investment for the sake of enriching the lives of the people who suffered for generations in this part of town. It's for what we've been seeing over the last decade and a half. The university announced a brand new conference center less than a year after it was announced they won the bid. Less than a year after that, they announced a brand new hotel was going to be built. Charles asked the question, right? Why aren't they building this on land that they own, given the fact that they're one of the largest landowners in this part of town? They didn't have to pay anything for the land. $95 million worth of land, plus, because they're asking for more now for the parking garage, was just given to them. With no referendum, right? They invited people into a meeting, say, hey, this is what we're going to do. You can share what you have to say about it, but it's done. So we can say, we brought you into a meeting. We shared what it is that we're going to do. Not that it changes anything, but we did it. And so now we have this estimate that the infrastructure improvements that are going to be made is going to cost $175 million. And this is Chicago, so we know that they're going to go over budget. So in the same way that we're on the hook still for the land that Daley bought from Michael Reese, how much are we going to be on the hook for related to this? We don't know, and we won't know, because they don't want us to know. And so, in wrapping up, why do we need a CBA right now? Since 2000, and I'm sure many of you have heard these numbers innumerable amount of times, since 2000, nearly 250,000 black people have left the Chicago area. That's a lot of people. 250,000 people just gone. When we look at Woodlawn, in that same, between 2000 and 2010, there's been an increase in white population, 127%. What's driving this? Now, of course, people can live wherever you want. I'm not up here saying that white people shouldn't move into Woodlawn. That's not my point. My point is that black people are leaving one community, and a whole nother set of people is moving into that community. Now, the president, last week, I was in the audience. I couldn't believe he said it. There were actually cameras there that captured it. I was surprised at that. But said that gentrification is not something that we have to worry about. Maybe Malia's children will have to worry about it, but we don't have to worry about it. And this is not about the president, but for whatever reason, the president is allowing himself to be the one out front on this, when the University of Chicago is the one that wrote the bid. The University of Chicago gave him the choices of Washington Park or Jackson Park, but he's taking all the shots for whatever reason. But if we look at the data says something completely different. The data says it's happening right now in the same way that the city of Chicago talked about the Olympics being a driver for economic development, which is just code word for gentrification. They're now talking about this in the same way. So I don't challenge the fact that the president wants his legacy to be connected to the development of the South Side of Chicago. I don't challenge that. The reality is there's a history that the university is connected to. There's a history that the city of Chicago is connected to, that if we aren't careful, is going to allow the Presidential Center to be a tool for displacement and gentrification. Thank you.
As you were told at the beginning, Michael Sorkin is not able to be here because of the blizzard on the East Coast. Couldn't make it to the balmy weather of Chicago. And I also want to say Jackie Stewart was also going to be a panelist tonight, but she has a family emergency. She couldn't be here, so apologies for both of them. But this is Michael Sorkin's statement. He asked me to read it in my best Churchillian tones, but I can't come up to that, so here it is. Jackson Park wouldn't have been my first choice. Better right on 63rd, halfway down to Cottage Grove, where the public draw and ground floor commerce would have breathed life back into that dull, desiccated, yearning street. There might have been direct goads to shared vitality, the archive above, and clubs, cafes, and community facilities below to spark the lively commerce of strollers to and fro, equidistant from Metra and L. But the park site can still engender happy knock-on effects if the OPC meaningfully disaggregates by, for example, providing artifacts and artworks to the DuSable Museum, agriculture to vacant lots, a high school of governance and community affairs nearby, neighborhood nutrition centers, and a stimulating array of distributed community benefits, including many not yet imagined. 63rd Street should be the spine, and there's plenty of vacant adjacent land in Woodlawn. The OPC can enhance the park, activating the shabby streetscape of Stony Island, closing Cornell Drive to commuter traffic, converting acres of pavement to green space, improving accessibility for pedestrians. Even the reconstruction of Lakeshore Drive can be a wise piece of public work that would otherwise never happen. Getting rid of the garage on the Midway is a real victory that offers hope for future influence and suggests that the OPC is open to serious negotiation about making itself better and more transparent. These are numbered theses, by the way, and I'm on number 4 now. Sorry, I didn't do the count. Number 4, the argument from expense against these roadway improvements might have merit if the cash were fungible, assuredly going instead for rent support or daycare. But does anyone actually believe in this zero sum? This is an opportunity to leverage major improvements in local infrastructure, and it shouldn't stop with roads. Restore the L, anyone? Of course, the subtraction of public park space reflexively affronts, but this isn't exactly Columbia 68, not an aggrandizing and oblivious act of racial imperialism. A more apposite comparison is the construction of the Metropolitan Museum in Central Park in 1876, built on donated public land with public funds and designed by Olmsted's collaborator, Calvert Vaux. Would anyone now want it gone? Still, the OPC should acknowledge its effect on the ground and provide in perpetuity a 2-to-1 local replacement of any green space subtracted from the park. The preservationist claim from Olmsted's original intent conflates precedent and exception. The OPC is the project and commemoration of America's first black president, itself an exception many of us never thought we would live to see. Obama was from here, an activist here, lived here, taught here, and chose a place for his library here. This seems an exception worth making, a celebration of rarity. Moreover, the precedent for the museum exception in parks, including Olmsted's, is voluminous and includes the Art Institute of Chicago, the Field Museum, the Museum of Science and Industry, the St. Louis Museum, the de Young in San Francisco, not to mention the Brooklyn Museum. Number 6, A CBA is a formula to compel a subsidy for the distribution of public goods in compensation for both a taking and a predicted effect. CBAs are conceptually fraught, forced to negotiate the contradictions of their dual pursuit of stimulation and prophylaxis. These are not my words, but building and conserving. They don't always work, and Staples, the invariable Exhibit A, is the exception, not the rule. Columbia's agreement with Harlem's politicians, a deal made behind closed doors, has not decelerated the terminal gentrification of Upper Manhattan in the slightest, and it was just reported that 9 years after the treaty was inked, less than 1% of the promised investment in affordable housing has been made. The Atlantic Yards CBA was a total developer con, achieved by dividing the community and then negotiating with a small minority of local groups who signed on to a gag order to prevent any criticism of the miserable project for which they offered cover. 7, what's clearly different here is that the CBA is community, not developer-driven. However, its crucial intention, building an equitable, sustainable, and beautiful neighborhood, not simply exceeds its own particular demands, but is beyond Obama's power or obligation to deliver alone. That doesn't mean the OPC's feet shouldn't be held to the fire. But putting too many eggs in the CBA basket and conscripting Obama as savior downplays the equally decisive roles the city, the university, the propertied, community institutions, and the people must play. And focusing investment on defensive redress isn't nearly bold enough a strategy to truly rise to the opportunity of this massive infusion. And I think that's what Naomi's real message here is. It's not just about playing defense against capital, but leveraging it and making it into something that greens the community. Any development must take responsibility for its social and environmental impacts, but the South Side needs more than mitigation. Communities must resist the reflexive conflation of any development with gentrification and take a longer, more nuanced view, working for something far more visionary and wonderful through coalition building and an ongoing fight for community ownership and the right to the city. Number 8, the hope and the promise for the OPC CBA lies in its origins in a broad community coalition, its articulate goals, and its track record. Most notably, its roots in the remarkable campaign that led to the University of Chicago's construction of its new trauma center, a win for everyone. The university, by the way, resisted that as long as they could. Pushback to the OPC is also a displaced expression of rage at the university's historic role in the ethnic cleansing and self-sterilization of Hyde Park via its massive urban renewal project and its decades of malign neglect of Woodlawn. But it's clear that the university is seeking, as it loads its South Campus with dorms, a hotel, a conference center, to efface the 61st Street DMZ and reform its relationship to Woodlawn in concert with the OPC and the municipality. How can this be made broadly beneficial? Surely hands-off isn't the way. How about building the new School of Social Services on 63rd Street for the active benefit of the people it aspires to serve? How about lending some lawyers to the cause? 10, the task at hand is to make sure communities are equal partners in fomenting a beneficial mix that will guarantee existing residents the right to remain and build a diverse and sharing community that especially embraces low-income residents and people of color. There's risk in an othering of Woodlawn by protecting it from a potentially magnificent opportunity to flourish, but a greater one in giving up this amazing momentum for a just and wonderful transformation. This demands real cooperative planning. And that's the words of Michael Sorkin. Thank you very much.
Okay, so these are the formal presentations. I just want to offer just some very, very brief transitional comments. I mean, what we've heard in terms of concerns about the Obama Presidential Center is issues of public land for private use, issues of public resources for private project, and really, the crux of the matter for me is the question of community benefits. Do we need a community benefits agreement? Can we trust that the community will benefit through the, osmosis or something? I don't know. Or should we really pay attention to some other things? And I just want to just trouble the waters a little bit in terms of mentioning history, mentioning the question of equity, and then talking about struggle. In terms of history, I mean, we really can't talk about who owns the land and claims to the land without talking about the indigenous people whose land was stolen to build the University of Chicago, to colonize this space. The other question is one of equity. And even when we're talking about public space, when we're talking about public land, we don't all access public land even when it's officially public, right? Young people in Black community are monitored, policed, constrained. So even when we have public parks, they're not equally accessible to the public. We have to keep that piece in mind. And the final thing, I'm glad our presenter in absentia introduced the Trauma Center, because any community benefit that's going to accrue out of this is not going to happen through osmosis. It's going to happen through struggle. The Trauma Center was agreed to because some very courageous young people in fearless leadership by the youth, some people under Coco's mentorship, young people in the Black Youth Project 100, and other organizations fought long and hard and were told it wasn't possible before the University of Chicago conceded to build a much-needed trauma center. So if we remember a little bit of history, understand the unequal terrain on which we travel, even when it's defined as public, and most importantly, understand that organizing and struggle is going to yield the most equitable outcome of any formula that we might embrace. So on that note, we have several people in the audience that want to kick off the Q&A. We have 2 microphones on either side for people who want to begin to participate in the conversation.
One of the recent talking points of the Obama Foundation just in the last couple of weeks has been that there's enough planning been done already and we need to just move on. And I think that's very unfortunate and problematic. Actually, in a nearby community in Pullman, they're having to redo a Section 106 process that was done incorrectly, and in response to a lawsuit are now doing it twice. And so I think if we don't want to do it twice here in Chicago over the Obama Center, we ought to do it right the first time. So I think there are concerns about the Obama Foundation's timeline and the questions that will come up about other programs that have paid for planting of trees over the years, and all the many things that Section 106 and NEPA review bring up. So we affirm lots of the other questions. We do, as an organization, fundamentally believe that real estate development in parks is not the right thing. We have, however, announced many times that we are not pursuing a legal remedy in this particular case, and do believe that vacant land across the street from Washington Park would have been the right location for this center. That said, we continue to work on our main focus, which is that the 19.3 or so acres that will be taken up by the Obama Center, we expect, should be replaced in the community, the green space as well as the recreational amenities. We are pleased that there has been some progress along those lines, and those are also demands that are part of the CBA Coalition Sustainability Platform. We're thankful that the Obama Foundation has been willing to talk to Friends of the Parks directly about those things. We find it unfortunate, however, that they've not been willing to talk to the CBA Coalition directly about those things. Thank you.
So I don't know if there are other designated respondents, but if not, the floor is open. But I also wanted to give Tim Black, did you want to say anything, Tim? Yeah.
Give Tim a mic.
Here, the mic is coming.
Okay. Well, I'm honored and very proud. I think I can say to almost everyone in this room, I used to be your age. Now I'm 99, December the 7th. the story goes that I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and the story goes that things were so bad in the South at that time that when I was 8 months old, I looked around and I said to my mama, shit, I'm leaving here. So I brought my family to Chicago. That's the joke part of it, but the reality is we fled the South to come north hoping for a better life. It was better, but not as good as we thought it would be. And so we had to struggle to bring about change. As Sam Cooke said, change is going to come. We had that feeling of optimism on the south side, on the west side, but we were on the south side. And on the south side, I could go on and on. We created many firsts. First black congressman after Reconstruction, Oscar DePriest, south side of Chicago. First African-American woman to go to the Senate of the United States, Carol Moseley Braun. Millionaires in business never worked outside. When I take groups on tours, they're just so happy. Now, I can brag a little bit and say that I had a little hand in bringing the Obama Library to Chicago. Had certain things happen, it wouldn't be here. If they had not saved, with the aggressiveness of COMED and COCO, saving Diet School and a trauma center, that would have been demonstrations that would have given other areas. So I believe we succeeded, and I'm not going to get into debate over that issue. I thought it should be in Washington Park because that's where the political history, closer than Jackson Park, the political history of the two outstanding candidates I've mentioned, that's the area in which they got there. And almost every politician every year will be in the, whether they're white or black or brown, will be in the Bud Billiken Parade. And that's where Obama began to get his organizing foundation and his political beginning in or near Washington Park. And I say this because I helped him to do that. Point is, it's in Chicago as all of us here wanted. It's on the south side, and we can debate. I'm not going to get into the details of why that debate can be. And what I want, what I'd like to have, is the history. It was on the south side. Of course, you can take groups on, and they're just amazed and astounded. And on the south side, and with Obama from I got this jacket on purposely. This is the African American History National Museum. And anyway, that's another story. But that museum in Washington, D.C., and this museum that will be in Chicago will give proof to the idea that we can do the impossible. And Obama is a living example, and bringing that to the attention of all kinds of young people is very important. And that they see the area in which the impossible has been done many times. That's my desire. I think it would have been realized more easily had the library been in or close to Washington Park, because then you could see examples in housing, in history of that story from DuSable to Obama. Who would have thought 15 years ago that an African American would be the president of the United States? But his wife, Michelle, probably told him, you better be the president since you come to the South Side. And he obeyed her. And so her family, her father graduated from DuSable High School, which has created many people like John Johnson and Nat King Cole. I could go on and on and on. Harold Washington. It would be easy. It would have been easier. But I'm happy that it's going to be in Chicago. The competition was fierce on the south side of Chicago. And we must create the community and diverse that community so that all people can live, people, as long as they are good citizens, can live in that community regardless of income. That's the thing that bothers me. The gentrification, as we said, when urban renewal came into being, we called it, in that early period, urban renewal, we called it Negro removal. And then the idea, black and white against the poor. I want to see the diversity in terms of the opportunities to participate in the life of that community, which brings to mind. Thank you so much. I could talk forever and ever.
Right behind you. Behind you. The person. Yeah. Who's doing Mike? What's your student's name? What's your student's name?
May we start asking questions?
Yes. Were you first?
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Al Devaney, and I'm a former researcher for the University of Chicago many years, almost 30 years ago. I'm going to start citing stats. One, my mom was the first executive director of Roseland Neighborhood Housing Service, which spurred about $500 million in investment in that area, and she also worked with President Obama when he first came to Chicago. Also, I've worked with over 20 years and touched and counseled more than 25,000 homeowners undergoing foreclosure. This is after I left law school and I was here researching, giving the community, back to the community which I serve again, 25,000 homeowners personally. I'm also on the board of ADAS McKinley Educational Service Division, where we've appropriated and helped 65,000 CPS graduates go to college and get, of course, their education, which now they've contributed over $100 billion to the U.S. economy. And also, the Clinton Library was built, and from 97 through 2014, they have helped spur $4.3 billion in economic development because of the library in Little Rock. So I say that because that's probably up to $5 billion. The Obama Center being here will spur probably twice that. And I also will make this statement that because of our standing and that I worked on, the CBA, the city of Chicago entered, and we talked before with Walmart, a for-profit business that has spurred I don't know how many billions of dollars, and that there was about $300 million in this area in the last 5 years that has yet to require one of those businesses or the University of Chicago to sign a CBA agreement. I will ask each one of you if you could remedy that before we ask the first and only president, black or otherwise, to be asked his foundation to sign a CBA. Ever. There's no such. And you can't cite.
Okay.
We'll get that. And I will thank you for following up and allowing us to have this opportunity to have this discourse.
Okay.
Bonjour.
Thank you. So what we're going to do with the questions, we're going to take several comments and questions, and then I'll punctuate and give the panel an opportunity to respond. So who's next?
My name is Liz Moyer. I'm a faculty member at the University of Chicago. I run outreach programs also for kids all over the South and West Sides as part of my research center. We work regularly with children in Lindblom Math and Science Academy in Englewood. And I want to say that one of the reasons that this, I would say, I feel uncomfortable speaking because I feel like this entire symposium is somewhat invalid. The center was designed for children like the kids that I serve. The point of the center and Obama's vision is to benefit children on the South Side. It's not to benefit a bunch of rich white Hyde Parkers. It's not to benefit faculty members at the university. We are not the people who should be making decisions. We weren't consulted in making decisions because we're not relevant. And so I know we all think our voices matter and our opinions are somehow more special than everyone else's opinion, but we really aren't the people who should be involved here. And there have been community discussions extensively over years with the community that actually matters. And that community is almost universally in support. I've been to the meetings in McCormick Place where I am a vast minority among a sea of jubilant African-American faces who are happy about the center. I look around this audience, I see a bunch of displeased white people complaining about things in their backyard, and we are not the people who should be talking.
You're not just looking at white people.
I will just, I understand. But nevertheless, the point is the Obamas are intending to bring $500 million in donor money to the South Side of Chicago, the largest single charitable investment ever. In order to get that donation, they need to be able to present a vision of positivity. They are getting people in Los Angeles to give money to Chicago South Side. What we have to do is not make their efforts more difficult with all our complaining and whining and nitpicking. We have to recognize that none of this is going to happen unless people pony up the money. And if we want to support the children of Chicago, it's our job to work on that. And I just want to correct one number about the Woodlawn. The property values in Woodlawn are still 25% below their maximum in 2008. So it's been rising, but only because it crashed to 2013. Property values are still low. There's a lot of people in Woodlawn with their underwater in their mortgages. So let's stick to the actual facts, please. Thank you.
Okay, over here, and then we'll have some.
I have to say something.
Oh.
I've been to all these meetings too, you know, about what's going on with the center. I've talked with Michael Strauss-Manis and the whole 9 yards type of thing. I think you're getting it all wrong. Many of you, you know, especially young lady that just finished speaking, nobody's against the center. Nobody said that we were against the center. We want that center. Who could be more proud of Barack Obama than us? What we're trying to say is, just like the young man said right there about Walmart not getting a CBA, if Barack was the first one to sign one, maybe we can get the other ones to do it. We're talking about changing the way business is done in the black community over the rest of our lives, okay? Yes, nobody, they'll say they're gonna hire us and then they don't hire us. Yes, they say they're gonna put money in the community or in the schools and don't do it because we have nothing to hold their feet to the fire. All we asking Barack to do is set a precedent. Make history here in Chicago by changing the dynamics of the way business is done in the black community. And it has nothing to do with not trusting him. It has nothing to do with not wanting the center here. It only has to do with if he did a CBA, we can get CBAs from Walsh and everybody else when they come in our neighborhoods to build and to put more institutions out here. University of Chicago, how long have we been fussing with the University of Chicago about not hiring people in the community? And they keep telling that tale that they're going to do it and never do it. Okay? So don't get this twisted. We should not even be having a discussion about not wanting the center and all that, because that's not the conversation. The conversation is how business is done in African American communities on the South Side and how we can change it in the future for our children. That's what the conversation should be.
Over here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Gabriel Piemonte. I'm one of a group of people who started an organization called the Coalition to Save Jackson Park. We're a group of folks from Hyde Park, Woodlawn, South Shore. I live in Woodlawn. I live at 65th and Stony Island. Another one of our members is Lionel Nixon, who's the last of the presidents of the coalition to save the South Shore Country Club. It was called the Country Club then. It was called the coalition is called the, anyway, a couple of things I want to say about Woodlawn and the statistics we've heard about. A few years ago, for people who don't spend a lot of time in Woodlawn, we have a lot of green space that we use for gardening. It's probably the biggest growing community certainly in the near to mid-south side. And we were looking around for some additional space, so we were pricing lots. This was maybe 6 years ago. $7,000 to $10,000 was what you could get. There were some that were priced out of range, but that was what we were seeing, and we ended up not having to buy or lease anything because property became available. But I'm part of a restoration of a church that was thinking about buying the lot adjacent to it in the last year to build on, similar to the lots we were looking at. It sold for $160,000, so they weren't able to bid on it. It's dramatic. The change is dramatic. Also, my neighbors, the division that I keep hearing reported about what's happening in our community is not consistent with what's happening on the ground. And I just want to reiterate the idea that nobody's against the idea of the center. And I think it's really troubling that what has happened for people who raise questions or critique it is that they get pushed into a corner. And I'm so very grateful to Tom and for everyone who organized this, because the biggest frustration that I've heard over and over is there's no space for conversation. And so this is a space where that conversation can happen. I mentioned the Coalition to Save Jackson Park partly because I want to mention another missing piece is information. So we've been FOIAing the city.
We also have a long line, so
okay,
Max, you
we've
wrap
been
up.
FOIAing the city, started doing it in the fall. We're suing the Park District currently. Every FOIA that's being sent out to any department about the Obama Center, there have been instructions sent out that the mayor is going to kind of manage all of them, which is important to know because the lack of information that we're getting is intentional. And so I just want to make the point that conversation's critical, information is also critical, and we have to really push to keep trying to know more. Thank you.
So we'll take one more here, and then we'll let the panel respond, and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, my name is Louise McCurry. I'm president of Jackson Park Advisory Council, and I want to speak from the perspective of folks who really do save Jackson Park. We're the ones who are out there every day for hours and hours and hours cleaning, picking up the needles, the condoms, the broken utensils, the picnic baskets from years past. We're the ones who are out reporting all the damage that's to be done. We're there every single day, actually working, not talking. For me, it's about our children. Our children who stand at 67th and Stony Island selling drugs because they can't make any money to feed their family otherwise have the opportunity with the Obama Center to actually have an education, to have their local high school improved. With the One Woodlawn organization that's working pretty much in tandem at this point, the possibility of making sure that housing is kept so that it's affordable. So there's some options for getting some really wonderful, wonderful things done in Woodlawn. For me, it's about the children always, 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 because we're going to be dead. But our kids will be here paying the taxes, paying our Medicare, paying our Medicaid. They're the ones who can either be selling drugs at making $25,000 a year, or they can have a college degree, or they can actually have a wonderful job and working in the neighborhood. So we have to make a choice. The choice right now is nobody's ever wanted to give us. Believe me, I've tried for years. For 10 years, we've tried to get $20,000 to do anything in Jackson Park. No one would give money because it's a South Side organization. Nobody wanted to come to the South Side because on the South Side you get killed because the murder rate's so high. If you get out of your car in the South Side, somebody might murder you. So getting people to actually be willing to give money to create a museum campus that includes a DuSable Museum, that includes all the wonderful things that are going on in Woodlawn, that makes it possible for families to come to the South Side of Chicago, say this is a really wonderful place for our kids to grow up. We'd like to move here and our kids to have the same opportunity. And that's what the Obama Center does for us. Suddenly, people want to come to the South Side, and that's an amazing thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna let, I don't know if Naomi or Juanza on either side wanna respond to any of the things that have been raised.
Yeah.
Sorry?
If I may.
I will. I'm moderating this. I know how to do this. She has something important to say. As, you know, head of DuSable Museum, we want to hear that. There have been about 10 things said already, so we're going to get brief responses, and you're going to start us off with the next round. Okay?
So emphasis on being brief. Mm-hmm. So first off, I think what's important, can you hear me? Yeah. So it's already been said that COCO, as well as other groups across the city, have been involved in creating community benefit agreements. It's already been said that COCO, along with other organizations, have worked to hold the University of Chicago accountable to the community, as well as the city of Chicago accountable to the community. I'm a little baffled as to why someone would think that COCO would be questioned about what it is that we've been doing to lift up the needs of low-income and working families in this city. That's what we do every single day. And so calling for a community benefits agreement for the Obama Presidential Center, and I don't know why this point keeps getting missed, but it is not about the former president of this United States. Of course, his name is going to be on the building. Of course, there are going to be something from the presidency that's going to go inside those buildings. I don't know how clear that is, what's going to go in the buildings. But this is about the utilization of the legacy of the first black president of the United States being co-opted by the city of Chicago and the University of Chicago. We have to be clear. I know I said I was going to be brief, right? I'm wrapping up.
You did.
We have to be clear about what's happening, right? The 7,000 residents who live in Woodlawn, 62% of whom are paying way more than what they can afford in rent right now, those are the people who matter. And have those voices been heard? No, they haven't. I know because I'm the person that's working with those people every single day. I'm the one making sure that in these meetings, they have an opportunity to share their thoughts, share their feelings, share their frustrations with not just the process, but the impact of the city of Chicago's policies and the University of Chicago policies. And this is yet another example of how this city does business to us. This isn't for us. We didn't ask for this, right? Now, we're not saying that it's a problem, but the reality is, if there is not legal protections for the people who live in these communities, we're going to get pushed out. It's a fact. This isn't something that we're anticipating is going to happen. I work with these people. I know the family that got pushed out. I know the family who moved to Iowa. I know the family that moved to Atlanta. I know the family that moved to Houston from this neighborhood. And so when we talk about we need to put the children first, that's what we're doing. Half the CBA is about how our young people are going to be impacted by this specific development. But if we take a second to actually think about the people that we try to ignore, we may start to come to different conclusions about what's happening in this city.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, and we're going to get, yeah.
I'll just say quickly, nobody gets to tell me I can't ask a reasonable question.
Yeah.
Nobody gets to tell me that certain information should be embargoed and I should just get over it. And I just want to say that on my opening panel, that building, that dilapidated, scarred, bruised, blighted building, was first purchased after 40 years in the hands of one family. There's a massive evergreen out in front of that building that was planted by the great-grandparents of the man who sold the building. No, I'm sorry, the grandparents of the man who sold the building. A black family that had been there since the 40s. It was a kitchenette. It was still in kitchenette form when it was sold. And it was sold in 2009 as a function of the speculation associated with the Olympic bid. And it has changed hands 3 times since that acquisition, almost doubling in price each time. And it sits because the person can pay taxes on it and they can pay the fines on it, and it's the Negro normal in the neighborhoods where some of us choose or are forced to live. Don't tell me what I can say.
Thank you.
All right? Now, we are looking to have a balanced and a conversation. Balance, conversation, education, inquiry. Why does anyone have a problem with that? So, when you understand the extreme racial wealth disparity in America that is structural in nature, and you understand that it's not going to magically transform on its own, and you understand that the process of designing a neighborhood has got to be managed, it's got to be measured, there's got to be a process over time, then you will just be banding together to like be that beehive of activity where those numbers are crunched and understood. And yet I do want to know how much that tax burden is going to be. Because it's not like I'm saying we shouldn't pay it, but not in a blind and not with understanding what the return should be. That's just part of my concern right now.
Okay, I know I'm supposed to pass the microphone down to this end, and I got to tell you, Naomi, you were a force to reckon with on our telephone calls, and I'm shivering sitting next to you right now. So I want to speak for the elephant in the room, which is the park. And it's really interesting for me as someone who was in the private sector, working in Brooklyn in the 80s on Prospect Park. And if you just compare the difference of what happened in Prospect Park to what happened in Central Park you had very wealthy people living all around that park that were happy because of the leadership of the Conservancy to go in there and take on major capital projects. But what happened with Prospect Park under the guidance of Tupper Thomas is all the work that came out of that built on a community-based coalition that was based on comprehensive planning. And I just want to observe as an outsider, and it's very difficult for me when I'm here, I'm talking about trees and topography and views to water. I mean, lofty things. It's like talking about a poem. When I'm talking about this in the context of real, everyday kitchen table issues that are critical to the success of a community that have been a part of this place, that are part of the cultural continuum. So I feel, and this never happens, I have to confess, a little out of my league with my colleagues this evening, because I am so inspired by their words and so concerned about this place. But I want to just make an observation that a lot of people that have spoken from the audience this evening are acting like we have no other choice, that we have to give the park, that the park is the sacrificial lamb to make this happen because we don't want to ruffle those feathers. And for those, I will tell you that I've gone online, and if you go to the city, I know we're on time, but I'm going to take another 1 minute if I may, I promise. If you go to the City of Chicago website and you look at Project 120, you look at the lakefront planning, everything has been scrubbed. We're looking at transportation, we're looking at economics. There is no foundational, comprehensive planning that is guiding the work that will guide this community for the next several generations. People should demand that level of knowledge so they can make educated decisions about their open spaces and the people that will move through these places that will knit this community together for generations to come. We should demand no less. Thank you.
Wow, good evening everyone. So I've just been sitting here listening, and I've been trying to control my blood pressure, especially Mr. Birnbaum. I think you have a great level of audacity coming into Chicago, talking to African American people using examples of musicians and bone structure, okay? Our communities are what is sacred. Our families are what are sacred. Parks are not sacred. Unless you are channeling Olmsted at a seance, you don't know what he wants for this community now. What this community needs now is the investment that's being brought to the South Side. That's our last best chance for it. The last best chance for it, not only in Jackson Park, South Shore, Woodlawn, but also in Washington Park, where our museum is located, the DuSable Museum of African American History, founded by Dr. Margaret Burroughs. I worked for Walter Netsch. I'm an architect. I worked in Walter Netsch's studio. I've known Ed Euler for many, many years. So to have folks coming in here saying that, oh, we're not against President Obama, we're not against his legacy. What happens to his legacy if we run this project out of the South Side, like Friends of the Parks ran the Lucas Museum out, along with $600 million a year in income to this city, and how many jobs that would have created in Bronzeville and elsewhere. But we're standing here talking about communities that have suffered economic divestment, that have suffered job loss, that have suffered being ignored over generations. And I know because I've been here. My parents have been here, my grandparents have been here, my children, now my grandchildren are here, and we're not leaving. So if we want to talk about what the University of Chicago has done with social engineering through real estate, sure. But saddle that to a development where our president, who we trusted, by the way, to lead our nation and be the leader of the free world, not once but twice, but you're saying that you're not going to trust he and Michelle to deliver for their own communities? I find that incredible, incredible, that we would want to saddle this project the same way we tried to saddle his presidency as a cure-all to every ill of America. He could not do that. Even in the 8 years he was there, he did the best he can, and we are still suffering the benefits of what he did, and don't we miss him now? So folks who want to talk about what you're going to come in and do for our community, go back, because it's very disingenuous. You don't know us. You're not a medium who can channel a park designer from 150 years ago, right? The benefits that are coming to the DuSable Museum of African American History, another underfunded, drastically and perpetually and historically underfunded museum, which is the oldest independent black museum in this nation. Our National Museum that Tim Black talked about would not exist but for Margaret Burroughs and the DuSable Museum. It is up to us to make sure that that legacy of our people, of the black history of Chicago, for everybody who came up here during the Great Migration, there's not a profession or an industry that black Chicagoans didn't lead in and were not pioneers in. We want to see that back. But to saddle this private development, the same way we tried to make him the cure-all and end-all for every ill, is just plain wrong. So if we want to say bye-bye, if you want them to get fed up and say, you know what, never mind, we'll just go someplace else. Like Melody and George did, like the Lucas Museum did. Thank you very much. I say that Friends of the Parks in this instance is no friend of our community. And if we want a CBA, let's have it on the public portion of the $175 million of public dollars that's going into infrastructure, not just for this project, but for the entirety of the district on the South Shore Drive. It's not just for this project. Yes, should there be a few more traffic studies? Yes, but every beautiful thing that attempts to happen on the South Side seems to get thwarted mainly by folks who aren't even from here and aren't invested in these communities and aren't invested in these families. And I'm not speaking to the Woodlawn organization. I think what is happening is that we are conflating issues.
Organization?
Yeah, no, I'm not talking, I understand your mission.
I'm not with the Woodlawn organization.
The mission of your organization, okay? COCO. I understand the mission of your organization. What I'm saying is we seem to be conflating issues of the University of Chicago and issues of the city of Chicago and piling on to a project that is meant to do us nothing but good. I sit in those meetings. I know that the goals that we have set and that we are committed to for local hiring, for minority hiring, for sustainability, are far and above anything you'd even dare ask for in a CBA. So if you're saying that you don't trust the Obamas to deliver that for our community, go and tell them that, okay? Because I do.
Thank you.
I trust them to.
Thank you.
Let me
just say
before
something.
Ann goes.
Let me just say something also. So I want to say something. First of all, black people disagree. Black people can disagree, right? And I think nobody has a corner on the market of struggling for our people. I've struggled for our people for 40 years. I live across the street from where the Obama Library is going to be built. There are issues to be parsed here, though. I'm actually much more concerned about the people and the community benefits agreement than I am about the park. And I love the park. It's beautiful. I look out at it every day. But I want to say, you know, to argue that we should simply trust a project. The project is not just Obama's project. The project involves the University of Chicago, involves Rahm Emanuel, who has not done right by our people in this city, right? You know, people, I think of, you know, prenuptial agreements. So I've been married 36 years, so they didn't have that when I got married, but people at their most idealistic moment, when they look into the eyes of their loved one and say, I'm going to be with you forever and ever and ever, and if they have $1 in the bank and a car, you know, they go and do a prenup, right? Which is to say things change, which is to say it's better to put things in writing so our understanding is clear. We're talking about issues of race and class here. We're talking about poor black people. So why not? Barack was a community organizer before he was anything else. If anybody, you know, one of the things he said in meeting with activists at the outset of his presidency, he said, it's your job to go out and organize and make me do my job, right? Channeling a previous president. So in a sense, that is our job, right? It's not our job to just say whoever's in charge, Louise Bernard or whoever, is going to guarantee X, Y, or Z for people in our community. So I think a lot of things are getting conflated here, and a lot of previous struggles and divides are coming out. But to say that we cannot demand from a black president, and we have to demand from a black president that he serve black people. Are you kidding? I mean, that was the goal. So that should not be seen as insulting by anybody. And anybody who's an organizer who's concerned about poor black people, we only get something by demanding it from rich black people, and certainly from big white institutions, and then oftentimes we don't get it. So anyway, so I just think, I think we're all feeling, you know, strongly about this. I'm glad you mentioned, you know, Margaret Burroughs. I go out and teach a class at Stateville Prison, and interestingly, a discussion with my students there about the South Side and about the Obama Presidential Center. And they want to know, how do we know? How do we know there are going to be jobs when we get out? How do we know that we're not going to get, my mom and my aunt's not going to get bumped out of the neighborhood? So they have a legitimate case. The sister over here made the point, why not have the Obama Presidential Center lead the way? That is the example. To say everybody else ignores us so he can ignore us too is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. So anyway, I just had to say that. Do you want to, did you want to follow up? Well, I want to let the people standing, and only the people standing, these are the last comments, but, I don't have to say it now. Okay. All right, so let's get some other of the comments from the audience on the table. I'm going to ask you to be succinct. I'm sorry I intervened. And then we'll hear back from folks up here.
Good evening, and thank you for being patient with this proceeding today. My name is Ann Holcomb, and I'm the chair of the Ethos Block Club that's centered in South Shore. We have 61 members as of today. It seems like every day lately we're growing another person. Ethos stands for Environment, Transportation, Health, and Open Space. We're a multiracial group. We're a multi-generational group. We consist of renters, homeowners, landlords, students, etc. So I'm here because he mentioned one elephant in the room, and I want to call attention to maybe an even larger one, and that is the PGA golf course plans. I've only heard it mentioned in passing today. So the PGA golf course plans, they're going to roll out their supposedly last public comment meetings next week. And this is something that was cooked up somewhere else and just really thrown at us. And those of us that live in South Shore, South Hyde Park, north side of South Chicago, we want to keep our park. We're giving away acres to the Obama Library. We're in support of the Obama Library. We want a CBA, but we're in support of the library coming. But we don't want this golf course. We want our nature preserve. We want our Jackson Bark Dog Park, the only one on the south side. We want family reunion greens left open space. We want the Chosen Few House Music Fest to continue right where it's always been. These are the things that we want. Now, we would love it if the PGA folks, the Chicago Parks Golf Alliance, were to come and sit down and meet with us, and we'd have an open meeting and we'd sit at the table with them and negotiate about these things. But guess what? They're not. They haven't, and they're probably not going to. They want to roll this out, do their, make an appearance that we're giving comments to them, and then they're going to do what they plan to do all along with very little impact from what we want.
Okay. I'm
So-
going to stop you there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to leave you with a little rhyme. Okay. We don't want to pay for the PGA to play, but we do want a CBA.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we're rotating back and forth, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask people to just be succinct. Are you in line? Are you? Oh, okay. So be very succinct. We have then 5 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I saw your interview on Chicago Tonight, and I wanted to deal with the fact of the problems with housing. And what's happening is I'm here to represent seniors that have been in my building, literally. One of them's been in there 40 years. You got 3 or 4 of them there 35 years. Several of them, it's a 12-story building, have been in there 20 years plus. And their concern is you're bringing in all of this investment, and I just want to do a little quick thing with the investment. You're not rebuilding the steel mills. This is not rebuilding Canfields, Nabisco. You're not expanding Ford Motor Company on Torrance Avenue. What exactly? I would like to see them numbers with this quote-unquote economic development, just a sidebar. But back to that rent. What's happening is the seniors, and their leases are coming up soon. They are literally, ma'am, they are scared to death. Because contrary to popular belief, you live here in Hyde Park, you don't pay cheap rent, especially if you live in an East Hyde Park. They are charging $1,100 plus. I'm paying it to live in a studio. So there is no such thing as cheap rent. So if they can afford to stay there, and they've been there that long, a smart businessman would say, oh, let me do something to keep these tenants because they're in their 70s, 65 plus, one is 96. What can I do to keep them here? They will be here at least, unfortunately, until they die. What can we do to keep this sustained property, the sustainable property here and these sustainable residents in my building? But TLC, Mac Properties, the leading, slumlords of Hyde Park, not because they're slum, but because they refuse to deal with these deteriorating buildings that are getting older and older by the day. They want to do the makeups, the patchwork, instead of really go in and fix the buildings. What can we do if we don't get it in writing, which was on that interview you did? They're going to continue to go up 5%, 8%, 10% until we push you out of the neighborhood. You guys be blessed.
All right. Thank you.
I want to thank that young man for bringing up the questions about economic benefit because we don't know the answers. We don't have the benefit of that. Because
we're losing people now, and I'm just saying, oh, I thought you were standing up. Okay,
I'll
so
be
these
really
are
quick.
the last ones,
Okay?
yeah.
We have a lack of transparency here because the foundation won't release the consultant report that their rosy economic scenarios are based upon. One thing they did mention in their fact sheet was that 2/3 of the construction jobs are going to go to people outside of Chicago, and that's in their fact sheet, that they produce. So the idea that all the benefits are going to come to the community is false to begin with. I mean, we don't really know what kind of jobs are going to be after the center is built. We know there's going to be a cafeteria. We know there's going to be a parking garage. We know there's going to be other low service jobs, but we really don't know what they're going to pay. We don't know there's a path to advancement. We don't know whether jobs there are.
So transparency.
Right.
Okay. Where'd you come from?
He was sitting on the floor.
Oh. You're all tricky over here. Okay. All right. Okay. Anybody else on the floor over there? Okay. All right. Go ahead. Be very brief.
Of course. My name's Rob. I'm a University of Chicago student. And so I wanted to bring things back to the University of Chicago for a little bit, since we are sitting in one of their buildings, and just mention the enormous new development projects that they're planning south of the Midway, which have been mentioned tonight. A new conference center, a 1,200 student dorm, and a 15-story luxury hotel. And we know especially the last two are going to radically change the housing market down there in Woodlawn. And the university keeps saying that these developments are going to benefit the community, but unless you have those benefits in writing, unless they're made legally binding, you know, the university can just break its promise like it's been doing for its entire history. You know, the urban renewal projects in Hyde Park. So that was just to bring it back to the university.
Yep, you're right.
So my name is Jeanette Taylor, and I live in Woodlawn. My address is 6454 South Maryland Avenue, for those who don't know, because we talk about those meetings having a lot of people from the community in them, and they bust in seniors, and they had to pay protesters at the meeting. So if we're gonna talk about it, let's talk about the truth. I was already kicked out of Bronzeville because there's no rent cap. I pay $1,000 for a 5-bedroom. My mother retired from Chicago Public Schools after giving 30 years of services, and I don't want to uproot my kid. You are absolutely right saying we're not talking to the people who are affected by this, but them people at them damn one-way line means are not from the community either. So let's talk about the truth. The truth is, the same folks, the University of Chicago, the same folks, the city of Chicago, who closed 50 schools. There's been disinvestment in Woodlawn for years. My neighborhood grocery store is a corner store that sells Flamin' Hots and chips. Where in the hell was the concern then? I'll wait. There has been no concern. The only folks who've been smart to get a community benefits agreement are those folks who live on 61st and Cottage Grove. They told that Jules, before it comes, they have to do 100% of housing replacement, whether it's in Woodlawn or not. We gotta have real conversations. This is about the elite black against the poor black. I'm a working mother, I'm struggling, and I'm tired of moving from community to community. I love this city. I want to do an experiment for a second. How many of you live close to a quality grocery store? Raise your hand. How many of you live close to a trauma center, so if something happens to you, you can go and get service? Raise your hand. How many of you can send your children or grandchildren to a quality school across the street from your house? Raise your hand. Now, how many of you had to fight for it? I'll wait. Had to fight for it. You didn't have to. We fought for a trauma center. We fought for Diet High School. I'm tired of fighting, and it's because we can't get past the you can pay $400,000 and I'll pay $1,000. But let's be honest, while you can pay $400,000 for your home, you going down to the Cook County assessors to get them taxes lower. So be true to yourself and be true to what's going on in this city. It is bad ever since they started knocking down the Chicago Housing Authority. Ever since. People have been put in neighborhoods that they don't want to live in. I will not say that I wanted to be in Woodlawn, but I've learned to love that community, and I don't want to be kicked out again. And so let's get back to you make $100,000 and I make $20,000 later. Let's get somebody to protect us and get it in writing. And I don't care if it's the President Obama. I don't care if it's the Pope or Queen Elizabeth. You get protection. You cannot drive a car off a lot without signing a contract. Give us a community benefits agreement.
Okay, so good evening. My name is Sharon Lewis, and I am a PAC participant. I sit on several PACs, so no need of mentioning any particular one. So the first thing I want to do is I want to address Mr. Birnbaum. And I'm so glad that you brought up Grant Park. So I'm hoping that the next time that you bring up Central Park, excuse me, that you mention that Central Park is built upon the bones, blood, and graves of a whole black community. So mention that when you mention Central Park. That's one. And I hope you enjoy your trip back home. So the other thing is about what housing is doing and what we're requesting. The cost of housing is going to go up.
Speak into the mic.
I'm sorry. The cost of housing is going to go up. And we're looking for the CBA and President Obama to change all of that. The Chicago Housing Authority has programs that have been put in place for years that people are not taking advantage of. The FSS program, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, is guided, put in place to help those who are economically depressed and having problems to put their lives in order, to help them save money, make them financially astute, and do everything that they need to do to put them on the road to home ownership so that they can get out of the condition that they're in, or to increase the ability for them to have housing not only in the neighborhood they're in, or to move to a neighborhood that they prefer to be, by doing that on their own economic 2 feet. Those programs are not being taken advantage of. The Mayor's Office of Employment and Development has programs for people to go to so that they can also get training and economic development to help push them forward. We have years before the Obama Foundation is coming here. Who is preparing for what's coming instead of sitting at home saying, they're gonna come and take my house in 3 years? The Section 3 program, same thing, training, development, help you start your business. What are gonna be the businesses that come with this development? We're so concerned about that. Go through the Section 3 program, develop a business plan. They will help you develop a business plan. You be the person who starts a business over in the neighborhood near the Obama Foundation. We have to take some ownership for ourselves. It can't just be, we're gonna put the onus on President Obama. And the other part of that is, we're talking about Amazon coming to Chicago. Nobody said community benefits agreement for them. Nobody's saying community benefits agreement for all of the rest of the development that's going on in the city of Chicago. They're building out the wazoo downtown. How many black people are they hiring down there? There are still young black men standing on the picket line saying that they can't work downtown. They go up and there's a sign up. Who is standing for them saying community benefits agreements so these young men can come in and work? So if it's gonna be for one, it should be for all. Don't just put it all on President Obama. And stop putting an undue burden on him because he's black. Put some burden on Trump. Put some burden on the ones who came before him.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fortunately, there's a large movement led by young black people that are putting a lot of pressure on Trump, and we hope they win. This is the last person. I can't take any more.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll keep it brief.
Yeah.
My name is Elizabeth Blasius. I'm a historian, and I work regularly with the National Environmental Protection Act and Section 106 processes. And they exist so that we can stop, look, and listen in terms of what is happening with our historic resources. And I really feel like without a final plan, as far as the Obama Presidential Center, it's really hard to be objective in those processes. And I as a consultant, would find it very difficult with all of the changes to really effectively assess the effects that the project will have in Jackson Park. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, it's been a lively discussion. There's a lot more debate to be had. I'm sure we'll be in rooms together talking about this and other things. You know, if this were the only front of struggle, you know, we would have a lot less work to do, but there's a lot more work to do, and many of us do that work through organizations and coalitions in our neighborhoods. I'm gonna give the panel literally 1 minute each if they wanna say anything. You can pass. And I also just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who spoke for speaking their truths, for speaking honestly, loudly, passionately, because that's what we need to do as communities, right? 1 minute, brother.
So I'm going to keep my head down. I'm not being rude, but I'm trying to get through all of this in less than a minute.
Okay.
So, number one, want to remind us that what I talked about was the University of Chicago, the City of Chicago, and the foundation. we are not dumping this on Obama's lap. That is not what's happening. And I would just ask that understand people have their perspective, which is fine, right? But if we're going to talk about apples, let's talk about apples and not talk about oranges, all right? So this is 3 people or 3 entities that need to be held accountable because, number 2, the University of Chicago wrote the bid. President Obama did not sit down in the Oval Office and sketch out what was going to happen. There was a competitive process. The University of Chicago submitted a bid, and the University of Chicago was awarded the bid. And so what I'm talking about here is the right people being held accountable, right? So Mr. Obama wants to be the front guy. So he's the one out front responding to what it is that we are asking him for from the community. And what we've been asking the university, they have said, you know what, we're a private institution, we don't have anything to do with it. How can they not have anything to do with it when they wrote the bid? The city of Chicago, when Andrea Zopp was in the mayor's office, she sat down with us and said they don't have anything to do with it. How can they not have anything to do with it when $175 million is going to make this a reality? If the taxpayer dollars were not being used to tear up Cornell Drive, which the foundation asked for, right? To expand Stony Island, which the foundation asked for, to expand Lakeshore Drive, which the foundation asked for. Again, if we're talking about apples, let's talk about apples. Like, these so-called improvements to the road isn't because they want to make life better for Southside residents. They're trying to justify the closure of Cornell Drive. And they're using our money to justify it and to make it a reality. So we're clear, and I'm asking that people pay attention to what's happening. The last thing, we're talking about CHA, Jawanza, Malone, me, and the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization have been working tirelessly to hold the city of Chicago and the CHA accountable for the $100 million they were stockpiling because they were robbing the opportunity for people to get mobility counseling, because they were robbing people of the opportunity to take advantage of the Section 3 agreement. There needs to be a lawsuit, and I'm going to say it, Mayor Emanuel needs to be in jail. How is it you can say to HUD, to the federal government, you're spending every penny that comes into this city, and then you turn around and hide it as a depreciation line item year after year? So yeah, we can talk about pulling ourselves up from the bootstraps, but if you got a mayor on the 5th floor of the city hall stealing your bootstraps every time you try to pull them up, what are you left with? And let me calm down. I'm over my minute. But the point I want to make is we have to not get caught up in this cult of personality. We can be sympathetic to the idea that a black man finally made it to the highest office in this country. But the reason why we're so proud of that is because of the legacy that black people have had in this country. You can't divorce the two. If we were not brought here against our will, treated less than human beings, and then having a struggle every single day we've lived in this city, forget about the country, in this city, where our taxpayer dollars are being used to disenfranchise us. What sense does that make? And so, yes, we're holding the University of Chicago accountable. Yes, we're holding the city of Chicago accountable. And we're not apologizing for it. We have a right to stand up as human beings, as men and women, and demand that our taxpayer dollars get used for what we want them to be used for.
You want to say 1 minute?
I just want to say, as the one who organized this event, I'm so thrilled that finally, I've heard the voices of my neighbors, communities. Not that I knew you would not agree. I knew there would be passionate disagreement. But that has been the problem all along. The numerous meetings, so-called community meetings I've gone to, have had none of this because question and answer periods have not been allowed to go on. People have not been allowed to argue publicly. And this is the first time I've seen it. And I said at the beginning, this is why I love this neighborhood, why I love my university, because it's a place where people can disagree and they can learn from each other. And I have been listening to the people I disagree with. I hope the ones who disagree with me or others here. You may have noticed when I was reading Michael Sorkin, I don't agree with what I was reading. Okay? It was not my position. I wish he were here because he has a very complicated and I think sort of in-between position. So not everybody here agrees, but that's what democracy is. That's what Obama stands for. That's, to me, the great legacy of his presidency was that he would make us into citizens. He would make us into people who educate ourselves, take responsibility for ourselves, and take responsibility for those who are in power to make sure they don't abuse it.
I was intrigued that the last question, which was about about regulatory procedures, it's pretty hard to get excited about regulatory procedures when you have so much passion in the room. But the reality is these procedures are critical. And what's been interesting to me this evening is occasionally Trump's name has been dropped. And as a Washingtonian and as a former federal employee, I've watched to great dismay the undoing of incredible regulatory processes that are in place, from everything from our drinking water to our environmental systems to our cultural systems. And we should remember that here in this process, because 106 and NEPA and 4F and the UPAR reviews, they're here for us. They're here to build a big tent so that we get a seat at the table and get to weigh in and be part of that conversation. I want to thank everyone for allowing us to be part of this conversation this evening. Thank you.
I do want to thank everybody for being willing to listen and being okay about disagreeing. It really is okay. Now the question becomes, so now what? What do we do? And I want to close my comments out tonight by pointing to a few things. Structure and process. Now, there's a way for us all to talk with each other and identify the things that matter most to us. I don't really see an either or in this room. I really hear a both and. And I ain't no Pollyanna, but I do recognize that structure and process can cure a great many things. So I'd like to welcome those who want to continue the conversation. And I want to say that Charles is right. Regulatory is important. It's not sexy, but I'm accountable for jobs and economic opportunity for the Future Energy Jobs Act that many of us have spent years at the table negotiating, okay? And there are real numbers about real jobs that are really promised that really will not happen in the absence of management, in the absence of tracking, reporting, tweaking. I mentioned we've been bamboozled 1 billion times. I've drawn a line in the sand, and so many of you have too, that we understand we're at a make or break moment in the Black community. 100 years from now, we may be living in a camp if we don't turn our possibilities around. So when we signed a community benefits agreement with Norfolk Southern. I don't know how many of you remember that. It was 2 paragraphs. It was changed at midnight the night before. It lives in a 200-page document that nobody is accountable for. The $1 million, the jobs, the air monitoring. It lives in process. So if we don't, as we're in this honeymoon period, write down what we're talking about. Understand where the money is flowing. What color is the supply chain? Is a tax-exempt organization with $10 billion in endowment able to amass unfettered wealth and not answer a question of, is your accountant black? You can see that these are simple fixes that we can make together. The training pipeline can't be one pipe here, one pipe here, one pipe here. It's got to be connected. We're working on solar, we're working on green infrastructure, and we can work on any trade that is relevant to the development of the South Side. But as the sister said, we got to start now. We got to be proactive. Who wants to get started now? See me. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's no neat way to close up the conversation. I want to thank people for coming out. I want to keep the conversation going. We can disagree. I think one of the things I've learned in many sit-down conversations with Dr. Tim Black is we have to be concerned about the most marginal sectors of our community, people who are the most vulnerable. And in my mind, the CBA will guarantee some protection, some limited protection for that sector. And again, as Jawanza said, this is not just about Barack, it's about the city, it's about the University of Chicago. We have to hold ourselves accountable, we have to hold each other accountable, and nobody's exempt from accountability. So in the spirit of that, let's keep talking, let's keep arguing, and let's keep fighting. Thank you.